Where is she? 9 seconds of silence. That is what it cost Kash Patel everything. Not a scandal, not a leaked document, not a whistleblower standing at the back of the room with a folder full of classified records. Just a question. And a silence so thick that veteran Capitol Hill reporters looked up from their laptops and started typing something completely different. Because what they were watching was no longer a routine congressional hearing. It was something rarer. A man in full control of one of the most powerful institutions in America, suddenly, visibly, inexplicably, unable to answer the simplest question anyone had asked him all day. Where is she? That was it. That was the question. And before we get to those 9 seconds, before we get to what Patel did with his hands, what happened in his face, why 3 separate journalists wrote the exact same phrase in their notes at the exact same moment, you need to understand something about the man who asked it. Chip Roy does not perform for cameras in a building full of people whose entire political existence depends on how they appear on screen. Roy is the exception, a federal prosecutor before he was a congressman. He built cases the old way, methodically, quietly, laying one fact on top of another until the structure became impossible to ignore. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't ask questions he doesn't already know the answer to. When Roy opens a folder, it is not theater. It is evidence. And Patel was about to find out the difference. Patel arrived confident. His team had briefed him. They had bullet-pointed every safe answer. What they had not done, what nobody on his staff had apparently thought to do, was prepare him for the moment a former federal prosecutor would strip away every layer of institutional language and ask him something so direct, so human, so completely impossible to deflect with jargon that it would expose in real time the distance between what Patel said about transparency and what transparency actually required. The first part of the hearing moved exactly as his team planned. Patel handled questions about resource allocation with practiced ease. His voice carried the measured authority of someone who understood how hearings worked, who understood that the goal was not to answer questions but to survive them. He was smooth, he was composed, he looked to anyone watching like a man who had done this many times and would do it many more. Then Roy got his turn. He began by asking about the status of federal investigations connected to Epstein's broader network. Not Epstein himself, who had been dead for years, but the infrastructure around him, the associates, the financiers, the individuals who had moved through that world and were, unlike Epstein, still alive. Patel responded with the language he had been using all morning. Active investigative sensitivities, established protocols, appropriate resources. Words that sounded like answers but contained no information at all. Roy nodded. He made a note. And then, without raising his voice, without shifting his posture, without a single signal that something significant was about to happen, he looked directly at the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and said, "Where is Epstein's girlfriend?" Patel's pen stopped moving against the table. 1 second, 2 seconds. His jaw moved. Not to speak, but the way a jaw moves when the brain is running through options and discarding each one before it reaches the mouth. 3 seconds, 4 seconds. A staffer near the exit shifted his weight from one foot to the other. 5 seconds, 6 seconds. The typing in the press gallery stopped, not slowed, stopped. 7 seconds, 8. Patel opened his mouth and closed it again. 9 seconds passed before a single word came out. And when it did, it wasn't an answer. It was a construction designed to resemble one. He said Maxwell was currently serving a federal sentence, that her case had moved through the proper legal channels, that the Bureau's involvement had followed established investigative procedure. Each sentence technically accurate. Each sentence a complete evasion of the question that had been asked. Roy watched him finish. He waited 1 beat. Then he said, quietly, almost gently, "That's not what I asked you." The room understood what just happened before Patel did. Roy said it again, slower. Not where she had been, not how the case was handled. Where is she? Right now, at this moment, in which specific facility is Ghislaine Maxwell being held? And more importantly, is that location something the American public can verify? Patel paused again. He said that the Bureau of Prisons made facility placement decisions and that the FBI's operational authority did not extend to Bureau of Prisons administrative matters. It was the kind of answer that sounds reasonable until you think about what it actually concedes. The director of the FBI, when asked about the location of the only living person capable of naming the individuals connected to the most significant ethical and legal scandal in a generation, had just said, "That's not my department." Roy's face didn't change. That was the most unsettling part. He simply moved to the next question, the one underneath the question, the one that everyone in that room recognized as the real point of the whole exchange. Had the FBI under Patel's leadership conducted any independent verification that Maxwell was where Bureau of Prisons records said she was? Had anyone inside the Bureau assessed whether the people with access to her right now were the right people? Given what she knew, given who she could identify, given what happened the last time someone with her level of knowledge was left in federal custody without sufficient oversight, Patel's hands pressed flat against the witness table, both of them simultaneously, with a stillness that looked less like composure and more like the physical suppression of something uncontrollable. He said that inmate safety was a Bureau of Prisons matter and that appropriate interagency protocols were in place. Roy said, "So your answer is that you don't know." Patel said that wasn't what he said. Roy said, "Then tell me what you do know." And what followed was not 9 seconds. It was longer. But the silence was only the beginning, because Roy had something in the folder in front of him that Patel clearly didn't expect. He shifted topics without warning, moving to the Epstein file materials. Not their existence, which had already been publicly established, but their contents. Specifically, he asked whether anyone at the FBI had independently compared the names currently visible in declassified materials against the full scope of what the Bureau actually held in classified storage. Whether the total number of individuals referenced in the restricted portions of those files was consistent with what Patel had previously represented to Congress. Patel said that ongoing investigative sensitivities limited what he could address in an open session. He offered a classified briefing for appropriate committee members. Roy said he had requested that exact briefing in writing 4 months and 11 days ago. Patel said he wasn't aware of that specific request. Roy reached into the folder and held up a single sheet of paper. He placed it face up on the table between them, oriented so Patel could read it. He said, "This is the written request, submitted to your office on the date printed at the top. Are you telling this committee that document never reached your awareness?" Patel looked at the paper. The cameras caught his eyes moving across it. He said he would need to look into it. And in those 5 words, the entire architecture of his morning collapsed, because there were only 2 explanations for a written congressional briefing request going unanswered for 4 months. Either Patel knew about it and chose not to respond, or the people inside the FBI responsible for managing congressional relations had kept a formal, documented request from a sitting member of Congress away from the director for 4 months without his knowledge. Neither explanation reflected a bureau operating with the transparency Patel had been publicly championing since the day he took the job. Roy didn't say any of that out loud. The paper said it for him. He wasn't finished. He referenced a specific communication, not its contents, only its existence, between a senior official inside the Department of Justice and an individual connected to the Maxwell legal proceedings. Someone adjacent to the case in a manner Roy described as irregular. He didn't name the person. He asked Patel whether he was aware of it. Patel said he couldn't confirm or deny specific communications in open session. Roy said, "You're not denying it exists?" Patel said he wasn't in a position to characterize it either way. Roy leaned forward. His voice didn't rise. It dropped. Lower and more precise, the way a blade gets more dangerous as it gets thinner. "Director Patel, you have now offered classified briefings you haven't delivered, deferred every substantive question to closed sessions, and told this committee that the location of the most consequential living witness in this entire investigation is," and I want to be exact about your language here, not your department. At what point does that pattern of non-answers become its own kind of answer? The hearing continued for another 40 minutes. Other questions, other topics, other moments of friction. But the room never recovered its equilibrium, because Roy had not accused Patel of anything directly. He had simply arranged, in sequence, the things Patel didn't know, the things Patel wouldn't say, the briefing Patel hadn't delivered, and the 9 seconds that the entire country now had access to on their phones. Where is she? That night, the clip moved. Not the full exchange. Just those 9 seconds, the question, the silence, the non-answer. Roy's face watching Patel not answer. 12 seconds of footage that communicated more than 6 years of official statements combined. People who had given up on this story watched a man who ran the FBI freeze on live television when asked where one specific person was being held. And something shifted. Not hope exactly, something more complicated than hope. The recognition that silence, when it is measured in seconds and placed into a congressional record and broadcast to millions of people on their phones, stops functioning as protection. It starts functioning as exposure. The 4 words didn't break Kash Patel because they were clever. They broke him because they were simple. Because they stripped away every layer of institutional language and bureaucratic scaffolding he had spent the entire morning hiding behind and asked him something a child could understand. A question so basic, so obvious, so completely unanswerable with procedure or privilege or protocol that the 9 seconds it produced told the country something no press release ever could. That the people responsible for the answers either don't have them or won't give them. And that after this many hearings, this many silences, this many promised briefings that never arrive, the difference between those 2 possibilities might not matter as much as we once thought. Now we're asking you, if the director of the FBI couldn't answer where she is, what do you think that silence actually means? Do you believe Maxwell is safe? Do you believe someone already knows what happened to those files? Drop your answer below, because the record being built in these rooms belongs to all of us. And the only way the silence loses is if enough people refuse to stop asking the question, where is she?